in 2011, following a career that spanned 40 years in ocean engineering at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, UCSD. Kevin Hardy founded Global Ocean Design to develop undersea vehicle components and unmanned ocean lander systems. In October 2011, he was personally recruited by James Cameron to join his Deep Sea Challenge expedition to dive the Marianas Trench Challenger Deep with a manned submersible and 2 unmanned landers. In March 2014, Kevin was invited to speak at the British Royal Academy of Engineering, the British Royal Society, and as a keynote at the Oceanological London Conference about the Cameron expedition. In 2018, he was asked to develop an ocean lander for the University of Concepcion's Atacamex expedition to explore the deepest depths of the Peru-Chile Trench, achieving a major goal of their marine science faculty. Kevin serves on multiple academic advisory boards. In 2018, he received a Doctor of Science honoris causa from Shanghai Ocean University, their first honorary degree award since their founding 116 years ago. He is a columnist for the Journal of Diving History about manned undersea habitats. He continues to participate in K-12 outreach, something he's enjoyed since his children were little. And he is mentored by a previous generation. He instructs a new generation of marine scientists and engineers to challenge not only the deep, but the limits of their known world. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Hardy.
Wow, thank you, Suzanne. That was great fun, everybody. I see myself there. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Let's see what we come up with here. And from start, let's see if that works. How's that? Can you see that, Suzanne?
No.
No. Okay, well, let me back up a minute. We'll try sharing screen again. Go to the bottom here, share screen. There we go. Let's try that one.
We can see it now.
Yes, we can see it now, Kevin.
All right, good. Let's see, we're going to say play from start, see if that works. Whoop, good. Well, this is the, so now you can see the cover of the movie from Jim Cameron.
Yes, indeed.
Perfect. All right, here we go. Yeah, I just have to start off by saying that this expedition could not have happened without the driving force of Jim Cameron. He really had this, he had the experience, he felt he had experienced the event himself to really best tell the story. And he was involved in every level, from recruiting the team to the design of the submersible. And it was a remarkable story to be a part of. And I really, you look back on it now some years later, and you can really see how it bent the arc of ultra deep ocean exploration. And it was, for me, an opportunity to fulfill a really kind of a bucket list thing, dive the Mariana Trench with landers. So let's see. Whoop, let me try another button here. There we go. The project itself was just an intense sipping from a fire hose kind of thing, but it showed innovative design of undersea vehicles, both the submersible and the landers that we have. We got to visit primitive islands and live among the islanders for a little period of time. And we actually suffered a horrible loss of two friends and colleagues, Andrew White and Mike Degree, one day just in a freak accident on a helicopter. And it hit everyone really, really hard. It was like a kick in the chest. And we actually sat around a little bit and discussed whether the risks were worth it, whether we should continue, whether it was worth the effort and the potential sacrifice. Well, we concluded Andrew and Mike would want us to drive forward, and we did. And I took this photo as Jim's submarine was lifted from the sea after he successfully dove the Mariana Trench. And we had 3 ships, and all the horns were blaring, and people were clapping and cheering. It was a remarkable day. I just want to go back a little bit in time to the inspirations that people like especially academics have always wondered about what lies beyond our current understanding. And this woodcut kind of reflects the opportunity to kind of look past the perimeter of our known knowledge at what lies beyond. And we imagine what could be, but we always test. And sometimes we find we guessed wrong, but that's kind of the part of the process. The HMS Challenger, looking back 1872, 1876, the mission was so unique that some of the instruments used were invented specifically for that expedition. So with new technology enables new insights. We have an opportunity to learn new things. One of those was depth sounding. So even up through Challenger, depth sounding was really done with weighted lines through into the 1920s. And, that gave you kind of a general understanding, but very few data points. But in the 1920s, fast and reliable means to determine water depth was with echo sounding. The speed of sound in air is 344 meters per second. In water, it's about 1,500 meters a second, or about a little more than 4 times faster. So we can get many data points, and seafloor topography began to be revealed. So we started off slowly improving our understanding. Seafloors were once thought to be largely flat, with all the features generally covered by sediment washed off the continents. So they thought it was a fairly uninteresting place. And as time went on, investigations continued, and we found the undersea landscape was quite different than previously thought. Lots of structures, and further investigations led to new discoveries, and not just the features, but the questions came up: what processes formed those features? So evidence grew that terra firma was not quite such solid ground. So what's so interesting about trenches? This is a picture of Japan Trench, and questions were rising. Wow, what do they do? Why are they there? And so in the 50s, we began to discover there's a lot going on down there. In the 50s, they were still discussing whether, continental drift was a possibility. Plate tectonics, how is it possible that entire continents could be moving? And so there was a very vocal conversation going on at that time, but it turns out a lot is going on. There's a subducting plate, an overriding plate. They actually found that the overriding plate was being subducted as well. So both of them were being recycled. And coming out of the trench then came what I like to call the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse, but volcanoes for one, earthquakes for another, and earthquakes that drive tsunamis. In addition, earthquakes trigger landslides, and there's the growth of land masses and the destruction of them. So about 50 years after the Challenger Deep, Professor William Beebe wanted to see the creatures of the deep sea, and he wrote a paper that actually got printed in a general journal. And an engineer in the U.S. named Otis Barton figured out how to do it. He knew how to do it, and they got together and they worked on building the bathysphere, dangling from a wire rope, and they went to 1 kilometer deep. So about 3,000 feet, a little more than that. So 50 years after Barton and Beebe, so they're increments of 50 years, the bathyscaphe, Trieste, dove the Mariana Trench 11 kilometers. So they've gone 11 kilometers deep now in an amazing event. And they only made the 1 dive. They were allowed to do 1, but they weren't allowed to do 2. But the 2-man sphere, similar to Barton and Beebe's, carried Walsh and Picard to the deepest place on Earth. And the record stood for another 50-some years. I was lucky, though. The Trieste was home ported here in San Diego. And because of my involvement at Scripps and my involvement with the Marine Technology Society, I got to meet most of the guys. Didn't know Picard, but I got to know Don Walsh, Andy Rechnitzer, a Scripps grad in 1955. And he was the scientist in charge, and Larry Schumacher to the right. And below in the left is chief of the boat, John Michel. All these guys lived in San Diego. 50 years after that came this guy, explorer, inventor, master storyteller, James Cameron. And so we got a chance to meet each other. And I was inspired in growing up by NASA's moonlanders in the 1960s. And I wondered about making them to explore the surface of what I call the other Earth offshore. It's a different place down there. Some place I've never seen daylight in 3.8 billion years. I read everything I could from this guy, John Isaacs, a professor at Scripps. And he had these ideas about untethered free vehicles. And later, with a bit of luck, after I began work at Scripps, I met Frank Snodgrass, who built these abyssal depth untethered free vehicles called DEEPSEA tide capsules. I had 1,000 questions for him. I remember meeting him for the first time in his lab. And a little bit later, they invited me to go to sea with he and Walter Monk in the fall of '72. And, you know, that became a long love affair with the science and the technology of free vehicles. So they invited me to sea, and on the return to port, they invited me to join their group. And that bit of good luck lasted 35 years out of the 40 I spent at Scripps. In the course of things, I learned how glass spheres were made, and I suggested a simple change to the Germans who were making this plug assist casting operation to make these glass spheres. And I suggested simply just to make the ID a little smaller, the wall a little thicker, and then we can go a little deeper. And it took us about a year to really work the issue, but they went for it. And then before long, we actually had the ability to go from 6 and 7 kilometers all the way down to 12, which is a kilometer deeper than the Mariana Trench. And so I think in hindsight, that was the single most important development of my career. And it opened the ocean depths past 6 kilometers for routine observation and exploration by many, certainly me. And that's one of the reasons that Jim gave me a call later down the road. So we had many vehicles, Mary Carroll, which was strong enough to go to the bottom of any ocean trench, but light enough to lift out of the ocean with one hand. We built a double sphere capsule called Bobby Ray that took samplers along for microbial studies. And there were additional landers after that. DOV Karen was a sediment sampler. DOV Patty was another deep water microbial sampler. And the vehicles are really like elevators in a sense. They pretty much go straight down, hang out on the bottom for a little while, release their weight and go back up again. So the vehicle is self-buoyant, and we add an extra anchor to send it to the bottom. They release an anchor and up she comes. So, dang, there it is. Go to hit dirt. That's kind of the navigational scheme. And we can do that all the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, you know, and because the vehicle is rather tall and skinny and kind of narrow at the base, they call it frontal projected area. It goes pretty fast, pretty straight. And so we use the same technique on the way back up again. So we drop the weight, the vehicle being self-buoyant, you can see it's floating off the bottom, and it stays upright in the water column. With an acoustic release on there, we can actually track it using sonars. We can actually range on this thing. We know it's going down. We know it's settled on the bottom. We know it's coming up, and we can tell the rate of ascent. There you go. I can tell everybody's not muted. So I got to know Jim a little later on. I met him in May, and he called me in October. And we were born across the Lake Ontario from each other, and have found him to be a man of his word and possessing great vitality. And he knows a good team will produce great results. And so he works hard to ensure that everyone is in good spirits and focused on the same goal. But you have to bring your best game. Jim's design approach to his submarine was the same as mine with the lander. You can see the similarities. We're traveling down 11 kilometers back, 11 kilometers for a total round trip of 22. And we optimized design for speed. Here we are with the lander meeting the submarine on the seafloor. The media followed our progress closely. So now I'm building the submarine in the landers in San Diego. And he only gave me like 7.5 weeks to build 2 landers to go to the deepest place. And I don't think anybody else could have done it, but we did. I had the luck of getting the help of Scripps Marine technician Matt Norberg during the build phase. His good nature and his skills actually made the challenging timeline pretty fun. I promised Jim we would actually have a lander by Christmas, and we got together like the very end of October. So it was really a time limited problem. But Friday, December 23, we were at sea for our first sea trial. And I remember pulling the quick release, and I turned to one colleague and said, I just sent a lot of Jim Cameron's money to the bottom of the ocean. I sure hope I get it back. But it did. It came right back. And so I sent Jim a picture of this, and he said, greatest Christmas present he's gotten in quite some time. But then he did a change up on us. He asked us to move down to Sydney to finish the lander build down there where the submarine was being built. That created a whole new set of challenges. Matt couldn't go, no McMaster card, all my machine shops were up here, but we went. And so we pulled the stakes and moved down there. And I found the Australian blokes were hard working with a good sense of humor. So they were fun to work with, good guys. And we set up in a warehouse along with other members of the team. There's our 2 landers and crates of anchor weights over to the right. And then looking the other direction past our landers, to the right, you can see a white sphere with an open hatch. That was a submarine test sphere to make sure all the parts and pieces and the fit and the pilot could still get in there. And then all the way at the very end, they were building the lithium polymer battery build station where they were, making it compensated assemblies. After the submarine was moved onto the ship, the landers moved into that build space. The machine shop was in the very back. And the fellow in the yellow shirt is Robbie Seed. He's a UCSD graduate and great guy. Came with me to Sydney to work on the landers. And then we moved on to the boat, Mermaid Sapphire, along with the submarine. Robbie's in the foreground on the left, and the fellow in the blue hard hat in the center is a fellow named Larry Herbst. Friend of Jim's, became a friend of mine, and he built the camera system that we carried down and back again. So we had some fun, went out testing in the Tasman Sea off Australia. You can see the drop weights hanging underneath the big lander, control sphere on top underneath that orange hard hat. And there's a drop arm with a Niskin bottle on the end of it, or a water sampler on the end that's pulled up against the face of the lander that drops down. You'll see a video of that in a little bit. And then there's a light boom extending to the right. Here's another view of the vehicle as we're launching it on the test. And we had syntactic foam for our flotation largely, and then the camera pods underneath at the very bottom of the lander. And here's a view of the same thing being dropped now into the New Britain Trench off of Papua New Guinea, and taken by Charlie Arneson, also a guy formerly from Scripps. We're everywhere. And down she went to about 8,000 meters. Jim would come to us, both as as an engineer and a scientist and helping direct this thing, but he was also a filmmaker. And so he'd come to us and he'd go like, here's the shot that I want. And so he sketched that thing out. He goes, divided in about thirds. And so you can see that we framed the shot pretty much as he wanted. So we did our best to oblige always. And the submarine was really built by a group called Acheron down in Sydney. They developed some new syntactic composite, which the submarine was largely made out of. Jim was very much involved in the design and the fine tuning of the submarine. I'd pop open the hatch after a test dive and he'd tell the team what was right, what he'd like to see improved. So he really liked the vehicle, though. He said it was you could kind of feel, it's like a good car. We could feel the road through the car, but you don't feel every bump. Some of the design considerations, a hard point for lifting on the front panel, because this thing is vertical. It it was really elegant to put LED lights overhead, and on the sides were the batteries. The drop weights were down below, positioned on both sides. They were about as big as a briefcase, and we dropped one on each side. And each weight had 3 release mechanisms to be sure they actually got dropped under every circumstance imaginable. So as we looked at the vehicle, Jim thought a seahorse was the closest biological analog to the submarine itself. Probably true. Here are a couple illustrations, and it's amazing how close, down to the color, that the imagination of Jim and the artists, as they imagined what the submarine would look like and what it finally looked like in the end. You can see the lights are on and off. There's the weights on the right side are dropping free, just like 2 satchels being released. And on the back are these fins that drop out there. Those fins actually cause the submarine to spiral as it's descending and ascending. That way it stays within a tight watch circle. So you can expect it to be on the surface, in a very small watch area, so you can recover it sooner. Here's the sphere as it appears in SolidWorks. It looks reasonably spacious, but once you pack everything inside, it's not so much. There's a lot of stuff that you have to pack in there besides the pilot. And I like to think of Wally Schirra, how he said when he got into his Mercury space capsule, it's not so much a matter of getting in as putting it on. It's pretty much like that. Once you pop into position and get in the seat, it's pretty comfortable, but getting in is a little bit of a challenge. He has a touchscreen control and instrument panel, and pretty advanced. The SpaceX Crew 2 looks like that now. So heading north out of Sydney towards Guam, we stopped for test dives in the New Britain Trench, about 9,000 meters deep max. And it's an active trench. You can tell by all the volcanoes and earthquakes in that region. And the rains on the tropical island actually push a lot of food down to the trench. So it's like a feeding trough. So there's we expected lots of interesting things down there. Jim's boat, the Mermaid Sapphire, you can see it down there in the bay, is dwarfed by all the volcanoes around. There were requirements for extra housing because we had extra engineers and scientists during the shakedown dives off Papua New Guinea. This is Doug Bartlett preparing samples for return to his lab at Scripps. This is a morning commute from that houseboat over to the Mermaid Sapphire. And everywhere he went during the course of the operation, the expedition, were the film crew, the camera and sound crews. They never interfered with what we were doing. But Jim was also busy as a film director, knowing that this was going to be filmed later on. The submarine itself weighed 12 tons, so launch was weather dependent. Rib boat, rigid hull, inflatable boat is on the back side to the left. You can see a reflection off one of the guy's life vests. I was pulling outward on the submarine from the ship to keep the lines towards the boat taut. And once it was in the water, they removed some flotation bags and flipped it vertical. And then they'd pop off these flotation bags and send her down deep. And once Jim was back on board, he described what he liked, what he didn't like. You can see a couple of the logos of sponsors, National Geographic and Rolex, on the side of the submarine. And again, this is about the time CNN started putting the news out to the world, what we're up to. This is an interesting video taken from the submarine. Actually, he's about 8,000 meters here, and it's an octopus, and it's just sort of strolling along the seafloor. Behind, you can see the edge of a canyon wall that's slumped in recent times. But I just think it's kind of fun and kind of cool to watch the behavior of this animal as it just strolls along on his tentacles, using them as feet rather than the jet propulsion water jet that it has. We learned that from John Isaacs, that still photography shows you species, but videos and films show you behaviors. This is a video of Jim moving up the north slope of the New Britain Trench.
surface deep sea challenger. I have found the north slope. Over.
And as he continued to ascend the north slope, he came across this little outcropping with sea anemones. And I just thought I thought it was just really fun to show the stability of this submarine, because he's actually not touching the seafloor at all. He's actually hovering with the submarine. So it gives you a sense of what kind of precision, control, and nimbleness this 12-ton submarine has underwater. After every dive, we download the data that we recorded from various instruments on board, including a pressure sensor. So you can see this dive started maximum depth at 8,221 meters, and he moved up the slope, where then a little gray arrow to the right indicates where he released, and came back up again. And on the seafloor, just lots of interesting things. You can see a little jellyfish floating past a core tube. So he meant to take images, but also collect samples. Here was a little polychaete, that worm that was somewhere on the bottom. And this is a video from the lander. So we're looking through this polished glass sphere made by the Germans at the submarine. And you can just see this thing, this is about 1,500 meters. But you watch how nimble the vehicle is, the submarine is. It just almost like dances, pirouettes. And from the submarine, we're going to look at the lander. They're testing out the cameras and controls, but also the possibility of docking perhaps and transferring samples over to the lander. The pilot in this case is Ron Allen, who's actually the chief engineer and led the development and design and construction of the submarine. This picture actually, there's a gigantic amphipod photographed by the lander over on the right. It was the biggest one ever seen. And sadly, it's too large, we thought, to get into the trap. But we learned a lot about the behaviors. There were scavenger amphipods, but also there were predator amphipods that sort of lay in wait, jumped on other ones and attacked them. But this one was huge. After every dive, the lander would come back up and they'd set it down on deck. And you can see the animal trap there with all of the amphipods on top of the lander. And Jim was right there every moment. Ron Allen was there. This is Doug Bartlett, and they're looking over the hull that they brought back up from the deep sea. In the course of these dives, we actually collected more giant amphipods than total in all history of ocean science. So we were pretty productive getting that stuff up. Jim went ashore in Papua New Guinea, and of course the film crew followed him. So it was an interesting kind of cruise to be on. The children of New Guinea walking to school had to carry machetes because the vegetation grew so fast there. So they were nice kids. And then saying goodbye to Papua New Guinea for Guam and heading for the place. This is Apra Harbor. And just as Trieste did in 1960, it's the staging port for the Challenger Deep. So it would dream come true to be there. You can see Guam in the lower image there. Maybe I can, show with my arrow here. There's Guam, and then the Northern Marianas Islands roll off to the north. And wrapping around there is the trench. And in fact, the reason they're there at all is because it's a back arc of the Mariana Trench. That land is being pushed and created by the motion of the plates. So the Mariana Trench, deepest place of all, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. I'm sure you've heard that. And it's deeper than a commercial jet flies high, typically. I think they get up to 40,000 feet now, but 35,000 feet, if you're zooming along and pilot says, you know, we're cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, look out the window and it's going to be almost another mile deeper for the Mariana Trench. We were met there by professors from the University of Guam Marine Lab. They got into the program with us. Very helpful. Here's Jim's boat, the Mermaid Sapphire, tied up to one of the docks in Apra Harbor. And then a new boat. They got a new boat for the lander team, the Barracuda. So my boat was that one, a little smaller, but it had an A-frame. So, and a good crew. So Solamonte on the left, he was the deck boss. Kevin Hand from JPL studying, you know, how does life form in a trench? Is there, and his interest is in Europa. Chris Simmons, Chris Massell, as we knew her as a grad student at Scripps, then the captain in white, and to the right is Larry Herbst, who was the camera designer. So we moved on board and we got to work setting up. Here's Larry testing lights. Here's Robbie working on a sphere. Kevin Hand from JPL is setting up his sediment analysis equipment. And the big day came, Jim Cameron's deep dive. So weather was bad, but suddenly there was a break in the weather and Jim decides to go for it. There was no time for the landers, so we left them on the deck. He just wanted to get in and get out. So we did. And so here he is on the surface, preparing for the deep dive. And those float bags on the side are the only thing holding the submarine up. So the divers are now going to manually release those, and the submarine is now negatively buoyant and it'll sink. And down she goes. So 2 hours later, he approaches the bottom and you can hear Jim exhale this deep sigh of relief as he sees the bottom.
Touchdown. Woo. Go down. So we get the camera. See something. Surface, this is Deep Sea Challenger. I am on the bottom. Depth is 35,756 feet. And life support's good. Everything looks good.
Nice. They were having a little bit of a problem though. If you saw, excuse me, some of those bubbles coming off that manipulator arm, there was a hydraulic leak, and that was actually oil that was beginning to leak out. So they had some impact later down the road here, but nothing serious. Jim, to his credit, insisted on a biodegradable oil in the event that a leak happened, and a leak happened, and you know, he had thought ahead for that probability. He didn't want to do anything that was going to hurt the environment down there. So he persisted on, and you can see that he's plowing some sediment here, playing with his manipulator.
Not exactly very dexterous, is it?
He's starting to lose some of the nimbleness of the arm and motion though, because it was leaking. You might note there's a Rolex watch on the manipulator arm. Since they were a sponsor of the dive, they just said, put one in view.
Okay, well, that might be a core sample.
But here's evidence, we think, of a whale fall. Bones made of calcium carbonate are forced into solution at that depth. So you don't really find vertebrate fish below like about 8,300 meters. But if they do land at the bottom, say a whale dies and falls to the seafloor, becomes food for a lot of things that are down there. And they think this might be an example of remains of an animal that fell to the seafloor and left a micro patch. In the course of all these images too, there was a lot of research that was done by a graduate student named Natalia Gallo, who worked to identify so many of the things that were in the images. Here also, no surprise, there was some trash we found down there too, just around. We didn't make a big deal out of it, but occasionally you find something sloughed off from the land above, world above. Paul Allen was out there with his boat, the Octopus. Paul's one of the guys that founded Microsoft, and you can see a helicopter on the stern there. And we were in touch with Jim all the way down back up again. So with Paul Allen's turboprop helicopter flying overhead and all of the boat horns sounding, Jim inside his submarine here is brought back on board the Mermaid Sapphire. And it was quite a day. People were applauding and cheering, and you really felt like you were part of something that was really special. And the only guys that got to see it, though, were the guys that worked to make it happen. So Lithia Atoll. We parked our ship at Lithia Atoll nearby while Jim flew to London for the opening of Titanic 3D. Came back later and said, "Kevin, I made it with 10 minutes." So in World War II, the entire U.S. 7th Fleet parked inside Lithia Atoll. So the islands themselves aren't very big, but the atoll is huge, and the water volume on the inside is pretty deep and great. So they were parked there waiting the Japanese surrender. There was prior knowledge that the Enola Gay was going to be flying out of Tinian to the north of on the Marianas Islands. So big place. So we got there, and a lot of small islands actually. We disembarked and stayed on Follow Loop, the island to the right, for a few days as our boat, the Barracuda, ran over to Yap for supplies for the Islanders and for the Sapphire. The airstrip was built by the U.S. Navy Seabees in World War II, and it's still there and still used. We approached the island. We thought of the U.S. Marines in World War II coming ashore with enemy soldiers hidden among the growth. Tough days. On the island, there were vintage corrugated steel sheets called by the Islanders. They were called Elder's Metal, and they were preferred for building because they were so much stronger than the stuff they get now. We went by a school that was there. They're U.S. Trust territory, and they have schools, and this is their native dress. They learned how to make skirts from the palm fronds, and nice kids, and they're very excited, and we're delighted to have us there. There's other children from other islands that sail over for class in the morning. And all around the island are remnants of the violence of World War II. You can see pieces everywhere, half tracks in the water, Jeep tires in the forest, bits of downed aircraft in the jungle. I found a mess kit from a U.S. Marine with stamped U.S. on it in the foliage. Our ship came back, and they brought along barrels of fuel drums that were pushed over the side, and they floated. And then a line was thrown on them, and they were towed to shore. So Jim came back, and he decided submarine dives were over. We did what we came to do. And, despite the problems that they had, he probably could have made another dive, but he didn't need to. So he concluded the submarine dives. He directed the lander guys, though, me and Kevin Hand and Larry Herbst to the left there, to go back out and get some more footage of the Challenger Deep. So we did. And we got really good, a lot of practice. We could take this thing horizontally on the deck, have it vertical over the stern in the water, and released in 3 minutes. So we headed for the middle pond, the deepest place of all three ponds in the Challenger Deep. Excuse me. It's a true 11 kilometers, but you can see the life that's down there, all the way to 11 kilometers. On the time of Challenger, they didn't think there was some suggestion that life didn't exist below 546 meters, but it goes all the way to the bottom and beyond. So the lander returned safely. And we got the footage that Jim wanted. And, but we had one more thing we had to do. We had to go back to the Serena Deep. Serena Deep is a little bit of a dog leg. It's still part of the Mariana Trench, second deepest place on the planet, found by Patty Fryer, University of Hawaii, and named by the kids of Guam. So she had a remarkable daisy chain of hypothesis, which I won't go into, but it was never tested because she didn't have the equipment. But it all depended on a geologic process called serpentization. And she told us where to deploy, because I had one more drop available in terms of time. I asked Patty, where do we look for? And she said, look for the white rocks. So we went right where Patty said, and we deployed our lander, and it landed dead on where she said. So what you're going to see now is the LED lights were overhead, the arm is coming down, and it lands on the wall of the trench. And that bottom slope is the true slope of the trench at that point, because we're floating overhead over that anchor. You see a little bit of material that was kicked up, floating lightly in the water. And then it turned out there's a few amphipods that kind of fly up and swim through the image here. So we're at 10,200 meters here. And the rock, the cloud moves out of the way, and right in front of the camera are the white rocks. And so Patty was spot on with that idea. She thought if there were white rocks, there'd be microbes because there's geologically formed methane. And if that was true, there would be the potential for bacteria eating the microbes, and indeed bacterial mats floating around. So in a bit of luck, we had a twist in the chain after landing, and we got a little bit of a rotation out of the vehicle with the camera looking out the side, taking shots every 2 seconds. And we're looking up slope, so the downslope face of the rocks are exposed, like up in the mountains, and with lots of light and clear water and high resolution cameras, we're able to look up slope, and we actually saw these bacterial mats that Patty had suggested would be there. And so every bit of her daisy chain we proved in that one dive. The vehicle came back, and we headed back into Apple Harbor, and we concluded our sea trip. But Jim Cameron looked at these images and said, that's the money shot. Those are the shots that I wanted with the submarine. So we felt pretty good about that. And epilogue and future. I just want to kind of wrap it up a little bit, but some time has gone on. We looked at what happened after the event. There was definitely, Jim wanted tremendous science was accomplished by all the scientists we had from various institutions. There was a special session that December at the AGU that talked about all the potential things that happened. You can see Kevin Hand and Patty Fryer, Doug Bartlett, and Jim and Chris up there. A wonderful website that was made to continue to share what happened from beginning to end. Jim and I worked on a little outreach project through a school up in LA to create little landers that kids could play with in their own. And all of the images from the landers and the submarine were reviewed by a gal named PhD student, Natalia Gallo, just a genius young lady, first-year student at Scripps at the time, working with Lisa Levin. She wrote a paper, Submersible and Lander Observed Community Patterns in the Mariana and New Britain Trenches. And it's become a seminal work in deep ocean hadal life. Just recently, we saw that it was that achieved 3,500 reads since it's been posted on ResearchGate. We've worked with new students. Ashley Nickel is another one who's a student actually now of Natalia. So it's sort of like, generations of academics. And she's using landers, did some very nice work, and it is pushing some new scientific methods using landers, all very well received. The lander that I built helped the Conservation X Prize winners in 2019. In 2018, backing up one year, I was invited by the University of Concepcion to help them realize a major scientific goal that they had to dive the deepest place of the Peruchili Trench, the Atacama Trench. It's 8,400 meters. So we felt pretty confident we could pull that off. And they had a film crew on board. And so they created this documentary for Spanish-speaking nations and turned out he won an International Film Award as well. So it was pretty exciting, but it didn't take 50 years for the next cycle. Victor Vescovo jumped in and had a submarine built, the DSV limiting factor. He dove in April of 2019, and the pace of Hadal exploration is picking up. He dove to the Challenger Deep, Mariana Trench, just because it's the deepest, people want to go there. In addition to that, though, he dove the deepest place in all 5 oceans: Atlantic, Southern, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Arctic Ocean, actually. So other countries are getting in. Alan Jameson from the UK is very much involved. The Chinese, Xu Xinwang, is developed a glider, of all things, so that requires a changing density. Weisheng Shui from Westlake University in China developed a ARV or an AUV, which is an autonomous undersea vehicle. And I wanted to kind of just take a moment and talk about friends, family, and shipmates. That we have friends, we have family, but when you go to sea with people, you have shipmates. Dr. Joe McInnes and I, he's a legendary sat diving physician. He and I were roommates on the Mermaid Sapphire. One of the benefits of this oceanography is that you create these special bonds, that you look out for each other at sea, and that doesn't really change when you come home. So guys like McInnes, other guys like Anatoly Segalovich, head of the Russian Mir submersibles, was along with us. Wonderful fellow. And imagine sailing out of Apra Harbor, sitting in the galley with Don Walsh, the pilot of the Trieste, knowing you're heading for the Challenger Deep to make a manned dive. I mean, that's just like a dream, right? So, and he's a shipmate. Patty Fryer, just a fantastic scientist and lecturer, and a wonderful friend, and she's, we collaborated on things together that really were remarkable. We have friend Bruce Sutphin, DSC U.S. program manager. He oversaw the lander aspects too, and just a wonderful guy, full of boundless positive energy. And he was the guy who came up with the fin idea, what they called the Sut fin, because it helped the submarine spiral down and back up again, so it would stay on target and not wander off if a boom was stuck out to the side inadvertently, causing drag and causing the submarine to go off to one side. And I think, it's like moments like that, shipmates. But sadly, just a few years after the project, Bruce passed away, and the word passed from shipmate to shipmate, just down the chain, like jungle drums. The first moments of learning that he passed, it just sort of gets you in the heart, and you miss a guy like that after a period of time, after having done all the things we did. But looking ahead, though, you have to look ahead, and we work with undergraduates. Here's Nikki Arm and Bruce's daughter, Mari Sutphin. Time and we move forward. Bruce's daughter, whoops, I jumped ahead a little fast. And her friend Nikki Arm, excuse me, are undergraduates at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and they show naturability for the design and operation of landers. So we had them in the shop, made them building things. They deployed and recovered, and we passed the baton forward once again. So I'm real pleased to have the opportunity to work with young people. And I think in conclusion, I'd like this quote from T.S. Eliot, that we shall never cease from exploration. In the end of all that we do, all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. And so with that, I thank you very much for being here with me for these most of an hour.